Hi everyone. Okay, so this video follows on from having a look at the Hebrew scriptures, and then the oral tradition written into the Talmud and the extracts. So we're going to have a look at the core ethical teachings, but it's going to be about where do the core ethical teachings come from in the sacred writings. So this video is going to be trying to show where these ethical teachings come from in Judaism. If we have a look at our map, our mind map, should have it here. Sorry, I should have had this ready. It's looking at this aspect of our mind map over here. So if we have sacred texts, principal beliefs, ethical teachings, or whichever way, so it's on this left-hand side of our mind map here that we're going to be looking at today. Okay, so going on from the information that you know about the sacred texts of the tradition, the thing with Jewish ethics, because it's so prescriptive in Jewish ethics, in the Jewish scriptures about the information that it's supposed to be delivering to its followers, is that there's really no word for ethics that you're going to find anywhere in these Hebrew scriptures, because it's not seen as something that separates itself from ordinary life. They're embedded into everything that a Jew thinks and believes. So the notion that you could potentially be thinking something that goes against the Torah probably wouldn't come into their mind. So the notion of ethics is taken for granted as having relevance to all aspects of Jewish life, their beliefs, practices, and all their actions, etc. Okay. But that being said, they have to get their information from somewhere, and we need to learn to be able to articulate it. So last video we were looking at was about the scriptures, and we looked at the Tanakh, which took into account the Torah, which are the first 5 books of the Bible, which are the teachings. Then we had the prophets. In Judaism, it's Nevi'im, and then the writings. And that all encompassing is the Tanakh, the first part of it, and that was recorded around about 100 Common Era, but were things that occurred literally 4,000 years prior to that, but it only just started getting recorded then, even though they had been oral traditions for that whole time, and they were written, the majority of these are written, recorded when they were in exile in Babylon after Moses, and they weren't written down and collated until about 100 Common Era. But this aspect here, where we're looking at the teachings, and then those teachings interpreted by the prophets, and then the writings are where a lot of the ethical principles actually come from. So then we learnt from the Tanakh, then we got the oral tradition, which was recorded again about 100 years after the Tanakh was recorded, and this is your Mishnah, which is the oral law written down, and then the Gemara, which we didn't focus too much on, but the Gemara are the rabbinical musings, so what the teachers are discussing essentially. So they think, oh, this is what's written down, this is what we think about that, so here's our commentary on that, and this is for you to decide what you should do in this situation, sort of thing. So we'd call it rabbi conversation or rabbis discussions. And this all put together is the Talmud. Now the Talmud, it should really have a an arrow on this aspect of it here, because the Talmud continues, and these rabbinical discussions are going to continue on forever if they go by their understanding and trying to understand the Torah as best as they can. This will just continue forever, so to try and provide more guidance for the followers. Now, an example of that would be a guy that you're going to start, that some of you may study in Year 12, called Moses Maimonides, and he comes up with this thing called the Mishnah Torah. And that was as late as the 20th century, where he's still adding to the Talmud. So that's an example of how it can still continue. So where does ethics then fit in? Well, all of this aspect here is trying to best understand what was originally written in here, so that Jews, for however long into the future, will have a source of guidance for them. So this thing about ethics is that they want to keep going back to here. All right, so forever they want to keep going back to the Torah to figure out, all right, what is it that we base ourselves in? Why do we need to understand that Torah? Because Miss was telling us how important it was that they kept going back to the Torah, knowing the Torah inside out, and the more that they read it, the more they're going to learn about it. And that's where their source of ethics really comes from, is always going back to the Torah there. So thinking of the as basic as the 7 laws that were given to Noah's sons. And it started out as simply as that, grew into this Talmud, which is ridiculously long and isn't complete. And that's all because they want people to make their own decisions, and they really want people to think for themselves. Now that sounds somewhat oxymoronic when they say, here's our 613 mitzvot. So it should be pretty prescriptive with that 613 mitzvot. But even them, they say, well, this is sort of the guide. You need to figure out that if this issue that has come up that isn't explicitly spelled out in the mitzvot, what you should be doing in this type of situation. And when we go from those 7 laws to the 10 commandments, to the 613 mitzvot, this is where we get more descriptions on what those ethical teachings are, but still they want people to be thinking for themselves. And it's not so much about following all the actions, or even when it is following the actions, it's all about right relationships. So even though it was the tradition that was written like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, and it was so prescriptive as in the 613 mitzvot, it's still all about right relationships, and that's what the halacha is all about. Is that right relationships. And if we look then at some of the prophets and what they say these guys here about these right relationships, they go from 7 to 10 to 613, and then they bring it all back down again. So Isaiah, one of the prophets, he breaks them down into 6, and he says that the essence of how you're supposed to treat each other, therefore your code of ethics, is walk righteously, speak honestly, reject evil, keep his hand from accepting bribes, stop his ears against bloodshed, and shut his eyes from looking upon evil. Then Micah, another one of the prophets, breaks it down even further into just 3, and he says to act justly, to love tenderly, and walk humbly with your God, which is a theme that Christianity borrows or uses because it's part of their scriptures too. But then Isaiah, another one of the prophets, he breaks it down even further and just says, keep justice and do what's righteous. Okay, so do what's right in all situations. So even though it's so prescriptive, gone up to have this many commandments, they can all be broken down into just those 2. And then another prophet, Amos, just says simply, seek me and live. All right, and that sort of notion is reiterated when is reiterated with the Great Commandment in Christianity. It was about if you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, that's the Great Commandment, then everything will work. So seeking the Lord and live, then you're going to have those right relationships with people. Why then do they bother with having these 613 mitzvot? It's because they want people to have common thoughts based on the covenant. So if it was just people had to have right relationships, yeah, we'll have right relationships, we'll seek God and live, but for the Jewish people, they've got to be based in something though. Like those right relationships are all based back into the teachings in the Torah there. And if we've got all of our community basing their thoughts and actions in this Torah, which is the premise of the covenant, and therefore an obligation of people to do what's right, then that's going to make it easier for them to have that common thought, and therefore more likely to seek God in the same way and have agreements on the way that they should approach ethical situations. So this is how the scriptures are providing ethical guidance. And just one little bit that's going to confuse you even more is that this entire process can also sometimes be called the Torah. Which is, even though by definition we'd see it as the first 5 books of the Bible, this whole process can also be recorded as the Torah. So that's where the ethics is deriving from the Sacred Scriptures. What we'll go into next is a little bit more of the specifics for Judaism and how they can be applied today.